Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley Faulkner, the co-host of Radical Respect podcast. And today I'm joined by my other co-host,
Kim Scott. That is me. And we are here today with Denise Hamilton, who has written a book that I'm so excited to share with everyone because it is the book that every single person in this country needs to read at least once this year. All right. So Denise, a little background about Denise. Denise is a nationally recognized workplace culture and DEI expert. She is the founder and CEO of WatchHerWork, a digital learning platform for professional women, and All Hands Group, a workplace culture consultancy. An in-demand speaker and facilitator, she has consulted for and presented to dozens of Fortune 500 companies, including GE, Apple, IBM, Shell, BP, and Meta, among others. Her thought leadership has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Morning Joe, Fox, Bloomberg, Newsweek, and she is a regular contributor to MIT Sloan Management Review. Denise lives in Houston, Texas with her husband and has one daughter. Indivisible, which we're going to hear from today, is her first book. Denise, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm more thrilled.
Yes. Wesley was saying he barely knows you and he already feels proud about how well your book is already doing.
Aww.
So congratulations on launch. And we would love to hear you read. The prologue to your book is the best prologue I have read in years. So thank you for writing it. I know it's a labor of love. And why don't you just start reading it? And then so for our listeners out there, we're not going to read my book today. We're going to read Denise's. And then Wesley and I'll sort of jump in and ask you questions as you go.
Perfect.
Yes, and I'll take notes.
What does it mean to be indivisible? A few years ago, I was scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I saw a statistic about the maternal mortality rate in the United States. Black women were dying in childbirth at 3 times the rate of white women. According to a 2021 report from the CDC, the national average maternal mortality rate for Black women is 48.9 deaths per 100,000 live births, compared to 14.7 deaths per 100,000 live births for white women. Not because they were in rural areas or having their babies at home, not because they weren't vocal about needing medical attention or didn't have money for proper care. Serena Williams nearly died because her doctors initially dismissed her concerns that she was short of breath. She insisted she needed to be examined, and the doctors found blood clots in her lungs. Black women were in the same hospitals with the same doctors. They just weren't receiving the same treatment. At a time when these women were most vulnerable, they were dying from difference. I was furious, apoplectic, actually. I remembered the terrifying experience of giving birth to my daughter, and as a Black woman myself, I was enraged at the deep tragedy of having to manage both contractions and racism. I didn't die. I consider myself lucky, but I shouldn't have to be lucky to survive. None of us should.
Can we pause there?
Yes.
We pause there? I want to give some space for this tragedy because it is so horrifying and so profoundly wrong and so shocking. Every time I read about it, I feel apoplectic, actually. So how hard, it must have been very hard even just to write these words.
It is because it's hard to believe that they're true, to accept that they're true. Because if they're true, how can we all not be in the streets like screaming and at the top of our lungs? And it's like, if it's true and we don't care, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
You know?
And I wonder, are there statistics about about other kinds of operations that both men and women have. I wonder, are there different outcomes for men and women? I always wonder that. I've never read. Do either of you know?
I can say that the statistics that, or the statistics that you're referencing about childbirth specifically, just adding to that before I answer your direct
Yes.
question, is that it was normalized with socioeconomic conditions, and still
Yes.
Black women were extremely on the high end of the difference. As for other conditions in men and women, I'm not exactly sure, but I know from a race standpoint, I remember seeing an interview with doctors and old medical books that had uh, wrong information about the
Yes.
pain thresholds of Black people, or the how thick the skin is for Black people, were still still, I think it was like over 30%. Like, it was a significant percentage of medical doctors today still believe
Oh
some of
my
those
God.
misconceptions. But for men and women, I know that this is all anecdotal, but I've seen in the past, but I can't recall the exact numbers, that women especially get told that they're being over dramatic, that they're being told that they should just lie down and calm down. And
Yeah.
a lot of their symptoms have been dismissed. And I think that also contributed to, like, what is the number one cause of death for women is heart disease, because I think it gets either misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all.
Well, you have to remember, for decades, literally, all heart research was done only on men. And then it
Wow.
was extrapolated to women. So if they thought Wesley needed a dose of 2 pills, if you came in, they would just say, oh, let's just give Kim 1 pill. Like,
Yeah.
literally, that was how this was done, right? And
Wow.
and like, I think we're continually unearthing these differential experiences of care. And in the book, I have a concept. I urge us to listen for echoes. And
Yes.
these are echoes of disparate treatment that we're still living with, and we don't always know how to name them, but this
Yes.
is a perfect example of an echo that needs to be stamped out.
Yeah. And
And
it's
they also don't test with different hormone levels for
yes.
women as well.
Yeah.
And if women who are pregnant, especially, aren't serviced, because they think that why should we do that, because it could be harmful to the kid, which is also, but that means that there is a huge, vast emptiness of research in terms of what drugs are and are not harmful for people who are pregnant.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the same can be said of menopause, right?
Yes.
This idea that, it's easier to just label women histrionic or
Yeah.
ridiculous or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, let's study this. Let's study this like we study Viagra. How about
Yes.
it? Let's give
Let's
that a
do that.
shot. How
Yeah,
about we do
let's do
that?
that. Yeah. I totally agree. And I think the part of the part of what you read that makes me so enraged is it's like this very dangerous combination of power and disrespect that has got to be like, I'm sure we can do all kinds of research in medicine, but like there's also this psychological power and disrespect. Like a doctor has power, and if they don't respect their patient, it's not going to go. It's a disaster, for the care of the patient, and for the doctor's outcomes also.
Yeah. And I think there's also like it's a great kind of physical embodiment of the problem of this
Yes.
conversation, quite frankly, because you have systemic forces that are big and macro, and we're doing what we can to disassemble those. But when it comes down to it, that's one doctor and one patient. And it's
Yeah.
wildly interpersonal. But
Yes.
that power differential, the vulnerability, creates a space that I can lose my life because you don't think I'm as interesting as the person in the room next to me.
Yes. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yes, it is, it is. And I don't know if this sheds light on the problem or not. But when my father, who's a white man, when he was diagnosed with late stage cancer, and he wanted to do one thing in terms of his care, and his doctor wanted to do another. And he was weak at this at this point, but he had gone through his life a privileged white man. And I remember he said to his doctor, "This is my body, not yours," and but still the doctor was blowing him off. And it was like really shocking to see. I think Kate Mann calls this empathy, where we have more empathy for the man. But I was like, oh, poor dad. Like, I got really mad at this doctor and kind of lit into, yes, it is his body. And we actually switched doctors, but like, I think it was a lifetime of privilege that allowed my father to assert himself in that way. It made it easier for him.
Right. And I think he was permitted, as so often is the case, he was permitted a full spectrum of expression. Right.
Yes.
Because if I get upset and I say, this is my body,
yes.
I'm an angry, difficult, irascible Black
yes.
woman. I'm impatient.
Yes.
Right. Like, I don't have the full spectrum. I'm not permitted the full spectrum of expression of emotions, and that is, it's so, it's soul breaking to not be able to even scream for help in a way that I can rely on that scream for help being responded to.
And healthcare is way more important than food. And I know you can't scream at the people who serve you food. And when you think about healthcare, if you get on their bad side, then the downside is so vast. So it's also a real sensitive relationship that you have to navigate to make sure that you say it in a kind way, so that you got to force them to care about you, which is really, really awkward as well.
And that's true throughout our whole life. That's been true my whole life. If I want to be promoted, if I want to make it home from a police interaction, if I want my child to be treated right at school, if I want to be respected in a store, there's all these parameters on how I can conduct myself, how I can behave, what's going to be acceptable, and who deserves support and kindness and who doesn't. Right. So this is a really graphic example, but this theme plays out across our whole lives.
Yeah. Every aspect of it. And I think your book is going to help us move things to a better place. I hope, because it can't go on this way. It just can't. So Denise, do you want to keep reading?
Sure. The next day, I came across another objectively horrifying statistic. The suicide rate among white men in America is one of the highest in the world. And I felt nothing. I didn't care. I didn't care at all. In my experience, white men had everything. They were society's winners. They got the good jobs and the nice houses, and they didn't care about me. As a Black woman, my whole life had been spent navigating their rules and battling their countless arbitrary advantages. From my vantage point, they had every opportunity, and their wealth, power, and success were usually derived at the expense of people who look like me. Why do they need me to worry about them? Who cares what their struggles are? My sleep was fitful that night. I got up the next morning tired and shaken by my deep hypocrisy. Like so many of us, I told myself the story that I was a good person, kind, understanding, and inclusive. But when confronted with an actual situation that challenged my beloved story of the world, was I? That morning was the beginning of a necessary process of exploration for me. How did I get here? What did it mean to be human? How were we all connected? What is our responsibility to each other?
Can we stop there?
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that must have been really hard to write also, in a very different way. And that you're able to hold both of these sort of painful realizations at the same time is remarkable. So how did it feel to write that?
Well, it felt fine to write it. It was hard to defend it.
Yes.
There are
Yes.
people who read this early in the process of the book who felt like, oh, you shouldn't put that in there. Like,
Yeah,
no,
as you
you
were
shouldn't
reading.
say that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, no. And I really felt strongly. I really fought to put it in there because I think one of the problems of kind of like the expert in our modern day society is we act, present, and conduct ourselves as if we're perfect. And the
Mhm.
truth of the matter is, none of us are.
No.
All of us are swimming in the same toxic soup.
Yes.
And do I think like you're toxic, but there's nothing about me that's toxic?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's not how this would ever happen. And I think that I'm a deep believer in the power of stories, how
Mhm.
stories inform us, how they shape us. I didn't come to this story easily. This is a hard earned story.
Yes.
I've been stopped on the side of the road by the
Yes.
police. And, I remember my daughter and I were driving on a lonely country road. And I share this story in the book. Um, and I think she was in like second grade. And a
Mhm.
cop pulls us over and he basically says like, can I search your car? And he was by himself. And I
Yeah.
thought like, no, you can't search my car. This is what me thinking. You
Right.
can't search my car. Like what? You don't have the right to. This is
Yeah.
not legal. You don't have the right to do this. But I had to quickly shift over to, yeah, but it's me, him, and my little baby girl. Like I got to
Yeah.
comply, right? Because they always
Yeah.
tell you comply. And so I
Yeah.
said, sure, fine. Go ahead and search the car. And so he turns to me, like my daughter and I wake her up. She's asleep. I wake her up. We get out of the car and he tells me, for my safety, I need you and your daughter to lay face down in the dirt
Oh my
while I
God.
search your car for his safety. He's got the gun. He's got the power. He can call the background. And by the way, you stopped me. I didn't stop you. You
Yeah.
created this situation. And now for your safety, I need to lay face down in the dirt. And so in my mind, like it's racing because I'm like, this
Yeah.
is ridiculous. It's the outrage. It's the anger. And I looked over at my daughter and she's crying. And I say, but am I really going to risk us being harmed? Am I going to risk
Yeah.
going to jail and my daughter being in foster care in some, town in the middle of nowhere? Like
Yeah.
I had to run through this calculus so
Oh my
fast.
God.
And we did it. We laid down in the dirt, face down. And I remember my daughter was crying and I leaned over to her and I said, don't worry, honey, it'll be okay. And I remember
Oh,
feeling so profoundly, that's not true. It's
yeah.
not okay. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my feeling that I capture here is a legitimate,
Yeah.
hard earned story that I have in
Yeah.
my head. Right. But I think that's the point. This is really the point of the whole book. Like, we all have stories that we have to allow to change. You have to let the story change or else it never does. Right? Our
Yeah.
stories don't give us up easily. And so when you are confronted with new information, what are you going to do when you hear a statistic that, like I say, is
Yeah.
objectively horrifying? Do you
Yeah.
dismiss it because it's not you? Do you dismiss it because it's those folks over there? That's not my business, right? Like, have we lost the sense that we are truly deeply interconnected? Right? It's like we're sitting in a big boat laughing at the people at the front of the boat because their end
Yeah.
of the boat has a hole.
Yeah. We're all
We're
going
all
down.
sinking, honey. We're all
Yeah.
sinking. So this idea of like, what does that statistic have to do with me?
Yeah.
That was what I wanted to explore.
Yeah.
So
And how, I mean, I want to put myself in your shoes for a moment, which I know is impossible because I usually get, you know, uh, unfairly kindly treated by the police. But like if I had been the one laying in the dirt with my second grade child, when I read that statistic, I don't think I would have just felt indifferent. I would have felt like good. Like I would have felt a real sense of vindictiveness. Like, which would have been not a good thing to feel, but how do you avoid feeling that, or do you?
It's just such a beautiful question. It's a beautiful, fair, super honest question. And it really underscores like the incredible compassion that lives in the hearts of all marginalized people in this
Yeah.
country. The
Yeah.
fact, the fact that we don't run around screaming at the top of our lungs all day long sometimes feels like
Yes.
a miracle, right?
Yeah.
But if I want a certain level of compassion and patience and understanding directed at me, and I don't want to be judged harshly as having some particular type of behavior because of what I look like, I have to give that to other people. It's just
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
Yeah.
have to. And I do want to say this. It's very important. There are different You're allowed to feel how you feel when you
Yes.
have been harmed,
Yes.
right? And I'm always very careful and I always want to make sure that there's people who say be like Denise. No, no, no. Be like you. Be how you feel. You process it the way you process a harm that's done to you. I don't police people's reaction, right? I police the initial behavior that elicits the reaction. So this effort that I describe in the book is a constant effort of trying to stay open, is prying the door open, even when really scary, horrible things encourage me to close them.
Yeah.
But it's an effort, and different people are at different places along that journey. And I want to respect the individual's right to process harm in the way they see fit.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the trope of, or the segmentation, or of us and them, and how it's easy to think of they have that problem, and not we have that problem, and the compassion that it takes to be able to feel compassion to someone who's in some ways a different group than you. But I also feel that people who are like gold medalists in the struggle Olympics have to practice that often enough that
Yeah.
they build that muscle because they are trained to do so. So it makes it a little bit easier for them to have compassion for these different groups because they see it all and they understand what's going on. But also, since we were talking about statistics earlier, and also since I see that you're based in Houston, I used to live in Austin. And in
Mm.
2016, I ran for city council, and I got
Wow.
third place.
It's
There were three
amazing.
candidates, and so basically, I had to put a lot of my opinions out there because
Yeah.
you get interviewed a lot. And one person who was a judge uh, called me out on one thing where I said that ID laws to vote, mandatory ID, was racist, and he's like, "I don't see how it's racist. Everyone has to have an ID and all this stuff." And then I said, well, if you look at the statistics, you see that people who are from marginalized communities are less likely to vote or have a harder time voting than people when the ID laws are there than before they are there. He's like, yeah, but it's not racist. I said, okay, then what do you call it that these statistics are now known and the people are passing these laws anyway? And he gave a pause for a second. He's like, oh. and And it's one of those same things where these statistics are out there. They're like, it just is what it is. But the people's lack of compassion and understanding that there is a choice not to do anything about it, that in
Mhm.
itself is racist.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The word racist is it's so inadequate.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most inadequate
Yeah.
words in our vocab. Really, sincerely. The Inuit people have 20, 30, I think almost 40 words for the word snow.
Yeah.
Because if you live in a frozen tundra, snow is very important. If it's
Yeah.
wet, if it's packed, if it's fluffy, if it's light, if it's heavy, if it's, frozen, that's very important. We have the same word for someone burning a cross on my lawn
Yeah.
and the guidance counselor telling the Black kids, don't bother to apply to that school because you're probably not going to get in. Like, those behaviors are
Yeah.
so different, but
Yeah.
they all fall under this big, and so it's made the word almost useless, right? Like, because people are so afraid of being labeled or called racist, or a system being called racist, that they're going to defend it. Like, it doesn't even matter if it is. It's worse to be called racist than it is to be one. And so, that's the next 10 years of my life, is figuring out a new vocabulary, because we're not communicating with each other.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
We're talking past each other. Because it because it's so difficult to talk simply and plainly with each other around these really complex topics. And like I say in this section, like, everybody thinks they're a good guy.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they're doing the right thing and they've got this figured out. And when you come along and you say, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not so- they can't focus on the problem. They focus on the assault, the personal
Yeah.
injury, and it's like, how do we talk about this then? Because if we can't name the problem without you focusing on the pejorative nature, then how do we fix anything? And so there's this huge gap of how do we communicate with each other.
Yeah, I think finding the right words is really important. I also think finding the right mindset is important. So one of my favorite books is Carol Dweck's book Mindset, about a growth versus a fixed mindset. And I think when it comes to racism, white people in particular who don't want to be racist need to adopt a growth mindset about this problem. I mean, it's another way of saying be anti-racist, I suppose. But because if we have this fixed mindset where if I say or do something that's biased or racist, then I am racist, then like that's an attribute that I can't change about myself, then I'm going to resist any knowledge of what I'm doing that's biased or racist. Whereas if I want not to be racist, then I need to welcome the feedback that what I've said or done is biased or racist. And Wesley and I have talked a bunch on this podcast about sort of breaking down the problem: bias, prejudice, bullying, discrimination, harassment, and physical violence, and then sort of understanding the slippery slope that one thing leads to another.
Right. And also even like how we talk about those things, right?
Yeah.
And there's like a whole category of behaviors that we don't even have a word for.
Yes.
I think about when George Floyd is literally being strangled by Derek Chauvin.
Yes.
I've thought about it quite a bit of like, why did he do that? He could have put him in handcuffs and put him in the car. He could have put him in handcuffs and left him on the ground. He wasn't resisting. You know what I'm saying? Like, why did he
did not need to do that? Yeah.
And I sat and I watched some of the bystander footage, and it occurred to me why he did it. He did it to terrorize the people watching, to let the people watching know, I'm in charge. I have the power. You can't stop me. People are running up, begging, pleading, I mean, even menacing, get off of him, stop. I can pull out my gun and I can stop you. There's nothing you can do about it. We don't even have a word for that level. It's the closest I have is terrorism, but that's not even the right word. We don't even have a word for that. So when I'm talking to someone about a subject like police brutality, we don't even have an anchor point, because you don't understand what that kind of terror feels like from somebody that's supposed to protect you.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's not even an analogous experience that I can refer to that will help you to understand, unless I really slow down. I explain myself so carefully. I try to find the right imagery and I try to find the right language. And in a world that everybody's in sound bites and nobody wants to listen deeply, how do I get you to understand that kind of terror? You don't have to be a hashtag to be terrorized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so I think like this idea of like the inadequacy, the sheer inadequacy of our language, and then the vast, like, you know, uh, force of people who are committed to even bastardizing that language further. If
Yeah.
we come up
Yeah.
with a word to
Yeah.
try
They're
to
going to
explain it,
intentionally
we're going to
misunderstand.
intentionally misunderstand and put millions of dollars into everyone misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Like it makes the evolution of the language harder,
Yeah.
which I have to believe is intentional, right? Because
Yes.
there's money to be made in division.
Yeah.
Right? They don't make
Yeah.
money
Yeah.
when we all get along.
No.
Yeah. And at the same time, they're banning the books that explain some of this as well.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. 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 It's so, it is, it's horrifying, really. And yet, I think, you know, as you say, storytelling is so important. And I think that, w- and solidarity is so important. And I think that's how we get to indivisibility, like, is that storytelling and
and
solidarity.
story releasing.
Yes, story
Story
releasing.
releasing is I should have
Yeah.
put that in a book. That's a
Yeah.
good little phrase. Doggone it.
And no
Too
matter
late.
how many of these stories are out there, people still don't understand the prevalence and how widespread and how the frequency of these interactions. I had a conversation with someone else and I was talking about some issues, my job history and stuff like that. They're like, what? But
Yeah.
you're in tech. I was like, oh yeah, I
Oh
it's
God.
not better.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I grew up in Memphis, and I sort of imagined when I moved to the Northeast, it would, you know, things would be. They weren't. I moved to California. They, you know, wherever you go, there it is. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
and yet I think, you know, this, Denise, what you were talking about, watching the murder of George Floyd and wondering what was going on with Chauvin. It's like there were no, at that moment, there were no checks. He perceived no checks on his power. And there were, in fact, no check. There was nobody who was able to make him stop.
Right.
And he had some sort of rage, you know, and I think the checks and balances, what's often called white privilege, is you have checks on the power of the people around you. Like, when I remember when I was a teenager, I got pulled over by a cop, and he started leering at me. You know, I was wearing short shorts, and I was, like, very uncomfortable. I'm in the back of his car, and he starts telling me he's gonna pull me over for vagrancy. I was in high school and I didn't have a summer job that year. and I was like, what is he talking about? And but all of a sudden, like, my privilege asserted itself. This is the privilege that shouldn't be privileged. This is what everyone should have. And he's like, he said, as though it was a threat, "I'm gonna take you to the police station." I was like, "Please take me to the police station. Anywhere but alone with you is where I want to be." But I had every confidence that, you know, I would do okay. In fact, I
Yeah,
would be treated
the
very
police
well at the
the police
once I
station
got.
was going to be all right for
Yeah,
you. You were going
yeah,
to
yeah,
make
yeah,
it home
yeah,
from the
yeah,
police station.
yeah. I was gonna call my dad, and my dad was gonna come in, and that cop was gonna be in trouble.
Yeah.
But he was a little surprised that I was a little at my attitude. And then he sort of said, "What's your father do?" And now I know I'm off the hook. I'm like, "Oh, dad's a lawyer." But he still wasn't letting me. It was like, "Oh, he's one of those assholes." So I'm still like, it's still a little dicey for me there, but I can tell I'm winning. And then he asked me where I go to school. And I went to the fancy girls' school in Memphis. And then he was like, "Oh, this is a dangerous neighborhood. I better escort you home." I was like, totally 100. And I always feel bad about that, because I could have gone home and I could have filed a complaint about him, you know, and that's what I should, that would have been using the privilege that I had. But, like, that's how it's strange to think about that, like to break down these incidents where he did have some checks on his power. He could get in trouble with me.
Right. And he ran you through the test, right? Are
Yeah.
you worthy? Are you
Yeah.
valuable? Are
Yeah.
you
And I was like, of
important?
course I am.
Right, right. And it's really funny, like the you use the word rage, like talking about Chauvin, like he had this rage. And I always think, it's weird how we expect 16, 17-year-old boys that are stopped
Yeah.
and literally harassed and cursed at and whatever by
Yeah.
police to have self-control and maturity. But the people that are the police, the
Yeah.
keepers of the peace,
Don't
the
have
peace
that
ain't keeping.
self-control. Yeah. Yeah. Where's
And
their executive function?
And disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. There are a lot of fantastic police officers in our
Yes.
country that are doing an incredible job and only want the best for the people that they're working with. And I always call on those officers to do their part to excise officers that aren't doing what they need to be doing.
Yeah.
They're more empowered to do anything than the rest of us can do.
Yes, absolutely. And it's puzzling to me why they don't do more, because the people in their ranks who are behaving this way are ruining it for the
They
those
all
who
have
aren't.
guns is why.
Yeah, I guess.
And they rely on each other for help and for support. And you don't get a lot of points because you narked
Yeah.
on a fellow officer. Like, I
Yeah.
understand in crowd behavior. It's in crowd behavior 101
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
want to protect each other. But you're right, that protection has this reverse effect of really causing damage to the whole profession.
Yeah.
Unchecked power just never really seems to go well.
No.
Right. And the other example where we've seen this is the Catholic Church, right?
Yes.
I know so many people that are so deeply devout, like they truly deeply love God and want to serve and want to care for people, and the ministry is their whole life. But if you stop 1,000 people and you ask them what happens at the Catholic Church, I guarantee you a pretty big percentage is going to talk about the priests and the pedophilia scandal,
Yeah.
right? That was a small number of people, but
Yeah.
those small number of people were allowed to act in an
Yeah.
unchecked manner. Any society, any group is judged by how the worst behavior of its participants conduct themselves. What behavior is tolerated or allowed?
Yes.
I didn't make up that rule. That's just
Yeah.
human nature. So it
Yes.
seems like you would work earnestly to make sure that for lack of a word, your brand is protected by ferreting out the bad actors in your environment. Right. But that's true for all of us. That's not just true for them. Like,
So
I have
true.
the option,
Yep.
you have the option to sit with somebody and they're doing something that is out of line, out of pocket. And because we don't want to rock the boat, we don't want them to be mad at us, we don't say anything. Right. And one of the things I try to do in the book is really try to get people to roll this back to human nature and assess, like, what is driving the choices that you make so that you can control it, interact with it, define it, redirect it, as opposed to, here's this list of the words you can't say.
Yeah.
Here's the list of the things you can't do, because there's no list. There's
That's long
literally
enough.
I can't tell you how to handle. Those are the strangest emails that I get. I'm in this profession. What suggestions do you have for me? I do not have any idea what you should do in your profession. But I
Yeah.
have a sneaky suspicion that
Yes.
you know where you recruit. You
Yeah.
know where your interns come from. You
Yep.
know what you look for in a candidate, right? Where
Yes.
do they have a sexy internship from Google?
Yeah.
Why is that important? That
Yeah.
just means their mom had a friend at Google.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to unwrap the things that you're doing, and you don't need me to come along and give you some checklist. You need to read books like mine and get, what's the concept here and how can I apply it in my own life? That's the goal.
People don't want to do the work. They just want things handed to them. They use the lazy web to just give me the list. And um, and the thing about a fixed list is that it's subject to change, right? And if you don't know the underlying rationale behind all of this thing, then that just holds no value, and you're unable to pivot or adjust or to kind of acclimate to a different environments because you don't understand the spirit of what's being trying to be communicated.
100%.
Well, and Denise,
100%.
you did the work in your book, and you explained how you did it. Why don't you read one more paragraph? Because
Okay.
I think this will answer the next couple of paragraphs will answer the question. Just next time somebody sends you that, just send them this paragraph where I began to read articles. You educated yourself.
I began to read articles and watch documentaries about this suicide scourge among white men. I learned about the factors that were causing them to take their own lives so much more often than the rest of the American population. I read about the loneliness epidemic, the isolation, and the loss of community. I began to understand the part unfettered access to guns played in this battle. Most gun deaths in the United States are suicides, and white men, despite the narrative you hear on the news, are far more likely to own a gun, even multiple guns, than Black or Hispanic men. I learned about the socialization of white males towards stoicism, secrecy, and avoidance of mental health care professionals. I was confronted by a perverse tragedy. White men are born with advantages conferred by race and gender, but commitment to the mythology of their superiority was a trap. Loss of a job, failure of a business, loneliness, and underemployment. Every group experiences these things, but for some white men, losing status could be a death sentence.
This is so powerful. What you're reading now, and the work that you did to come to this understanding. And I think like the word that you in those paragraphs that most struck me is like this feeling that this need to be consider yourself superior is so strange. Like where do where does that come from? Like, what is that about? I remember when my children were little, they were talking about their school. They went to Ohlone, which is a public school in Palo Alto, and they were saying our school is the best school in California because we have a library. And I said, "Well, almost every school." I mean, I wasn't trying. I was like, "Well, what is this? Why do we have to go to the best school? Like, where does that belief have to?" And I said, "Almost every school in California has a library." And they were like crestfallen. And I said, "But that doesn't mean you can't love your school. Like what is that about?"
I think that we have wrapped up this idea of um, capitalism and personal responsibility and like opportunity, the idea that you too can be a millionaire,
Yeah.
right?
Or a
Makes
billionaire.
us
Millionaire is not enough.
really, I'm so sorry. I'm so passe. I'm so yesterday. I'm so last year with millionaire, billionaire. I'm sorry. Um, and the kind of like the best part of what's possible in America, like
Yeah.
that aspirational story, and we do not understand the downside of that.
Yeah.
I love Mike Rowe, who does the Dirty Jobs series, and I think we have learned to disrespect work,
Yeah.
disrespect people that pay their taxes are schmucks. People that follow the rules are, you know, they're marks to be taken advantage of. And this idea that it doesn't matter how much money you have, you need more. Like it's
Yeah.
a constant competition. And more importantly, it doesn't matter how you got your money,
Yes.
right? Right? You can addict a whole nation to opioids and just go ahead and pay some money and put your name on the wing of a
Ugh.
museum,
Did
right?
you
Like
did you read Empire of Pain?
I did.
Oh my gosh, that book.
I mean, like we have this weird
Sacklers.
Yeah.
habit of enshrining failure, right?
Yeah.
The kind of the head, some of the hedge fund guys, some of the
Uh,
folks that kind of go into, this company has been in this small town. It employs 2,000 people and it's been here for 50 years. And this financial body kind of comes in and strips it of its resources and pulls all the money out and then says, okay, our work is done, saddled it with debt. And then we're
yeah.
shocked when the plant closes down
Yeah.
and 2,000 people are out of work. And, oh, why are these small towns in America dying? And we
Yeah.
act like we don't know what happened. And those are the people that give the talks at the big conferences because they're the
Yep.
winners, because they
Yeah.
were able to strip the value. I think of it as, I call them extractors. In
Yes.
the
They're
book,
not builders.
I have a metaphor around owners and renters, that we
Yeah.
are overrun, with extractors. So in my mind, what's an owner? An owner is concerned with the long-term viability of an asset. So they fix
Mm-hmm.
the foundation and the
Mm-hmm.
electrical panels and the plumbing, the unsexy stuff that nobody's even going to see. But I know that this is how to preserve this asset for years and years and years to come.
Mm-hmm.
Renters use peel and stick tile
Yeah.
because they're temporary users of that space. They're just here for the when is the lease up, and then I'm out, right? And that doesn't. I'm not denigrating renters. I'm just saying we are not renters of this country. We're literally the
Yeah.
owners, and
Yeah.
we act like extractors. We are overrun with extractors, and we have elevated these people and made them gods and heroes, that not only are they not committed to planting trees for the next generation, they are pulling up the trees that somebody else planted. Like,
Yes.
how can these be the
Yes.
heroes of the current American story? How did we get here? Right? So this idea of celebration of extraction as victory, it
It's
cannot
got to
Right.
persist.
stop. Yeah.
It has to stop.
I have two quick questions, and
Yeah.
I haven't read the book. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy. But is the title of the book a nod to the Pledge of Allegiance, the
Yes.
Indivisible?
It's
Okay,
the only
and
place
this,
I've ever seen that
yeah,
word. I've never
yeah,
seen the word in the dictionary.
and it seems like, especially what you're saying in the last part is a nod to American exceptionalism of like being the best and being number one, and only in this country could someone like uh, Martin Shkreli, Farmer Bro, be considered a polarizing figure instead of a villain,
Yeah.
where because they reached the top or pinnacle of being like willing to rob rich poor people, that he could still be on other people's shows and still be on someone's committee or board, or
Who
some
is
people taking
who?
advice. Martin
Martin.
Shkreli, he was Pharma Bro, I forget, but I think he raised some medication from like something like $30 to $800,
Got it.
and people needed it to live, and so he
That was how he made
eventually
his money.
yes, he eventually got sent to jail for fraud or something like that. And there's a lot, you can Google him,
Okay.
but he's not been like, I think he bought like a very rare Wu Tang album like for $2 million, and then Wu Tang said, "Please give it back because we don't want you to have it."
Wow.
We don't want you
Uh,
to have
it,
it.
it's just that someone like that,
Yeah.
uh, and and someone who is just considered like universally disliked. Going back to Texas, like Ted Cruz, that still could be someone could be like, yeah, I'm for that guy. I'm for that
Oh
person
my gosh,
just because.
I have the best Ted Cruz story.
Oh, let's hear
So
it. Let's hear it.
you remember the freeze that we had
Yep.
in
Yeah.
2021.
like unbelievable. A whole state is without power. We are freezing to death. In Houston, we don't have that kind of weather, so people's houses weren't built for that. Even your fireplace, if you have a fireplace, it didn't really put out heat. Like it was really an incredibly tragic time. I don't think the rest of the country even understood how dangerous that storm was. But you've all heard how Ted Cruz took his family to Cancun
Yeah.
because he wanted to avoid the cold. And I was talking with someone about that, and I was horrified because I was like, wait, aren't you our leader? Like, aren't you
Yeah.
supposed to be helping? And the other person said, well, Denise, what did you want him to do? He's not an electrician.
Oh, God.
And that's why literally all these stories are why I wrote the book. Like,
Yeah.
how did we get here? How
Yeah.
did we get here where we find excuses for the most ridiculous behavior? And because, we have this like ridiculous reductionist idea of red or blue, how crazy is it to think that the whole world can be reduced to two perspectives? It's just the most asinine
Yes.
thing in the world. But let's put that aside. But the idea that he's on my team, he's my guy, so I'm going to back his play no matter what he does, it was just shocking to me. And
Yeah.
so we're in this space, again, extractors. You don't mind taking the paycheck, but when it's cold, you're going to get your family nice and warm. You're not going to be checking on your constituents or seeing what you can do to expedite resources. Like, none of that was happening. And you live in a mansion
Yeah.
in the richest part of town. Like, what is this community supposed to do that's literally has people freezing to death in their beds? Like,
Wow.
and that idea, this like justification of extraction over and
Yep.
over and over again has had the most dispiriting impact on our whole culture, on our whole
Yeah.
society, because now we've made it stupid to have that job. It's stupid to work like that. I don't know why you would do that. I don't know why. That's beneath, everything is beneath everybody. So
Yeah.
what we end up having is like, nobody feels like they own this place. This is my house that I've inherited, and I've got to sweep the porch, and I've got to mow the lawn, and it's
Yeah.
my turn, my generation's turn to renovate the kitchen or
Yeah.
update the bathroom. Like, that's what we're supposed to be doing, but everyone is like just in their Lululemon sitting at Starbucks,
Yeah.
like checked out. And so what do we have to do to kind of remind people of the very necessary work of America? This is not on autopilot. It requires an investment. It requires work. And instead of we're not only not doing the work, we're literally elevating people who are famous for not doing the work
For
or for
creating
tearing
work for the
down
rest
the
of us.
work
Yeah.
for other people. Like, how do we get here? And I want with the book to just remind people of their power. Remind
Yes.
them who they are, because we have forgotten who we are. We are living beneath our privilege. And so
Yes.
how do we kind of lean back in and find whatever our work is? And there's a lot of messaging, right? If you're over 22 and you don't have a $1 billion company, what are you even doing with your life, you loser? Right? Like, that's the message. We have all these messages that tell all of us that we're nothing. Why? Who
Yeah.
benefits from all of us thinking like we're nothing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It must
Yes.
mean, like we always talk about voter suppression. If voting didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to stop you from voting as much
Yes.
as they do, right? So
Yes.
I just want to remind everyone who we are and what we're capable of. I think it's essential.
That is a beautiful way to end from your mouth to everyone's ears, everyone in this in this country, because we should honor one another. We should honor the work, and we can get out of this mess. So thank you. You did incredible work. A true labor of love. Your book. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I always, my mantra is there's no greater gift than the gift of your attention. So thank you so much for reading it and for caring about it. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk today.
Denise,
Thank
one more
you.
time, the name of your book and where people can get it.
The name of the book is Indivisible. And if you go to Indivisible now, you can see all the places that you can order it, or walk into your local neighborhood bookstore, independent bookstore, and see if they've got it.
And
Let's
hold it
support
up so
small
people can
businesses.
see it, know what it looks like
Oh,
for those
yes.
folks who are watching on YouTube. All right, Indivisible.
Absolutely.
Buy 5 or 6 copies today and share it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having on the podcast. And for those listening, and if you would have some comments on what we discussed today, please send us an email at hello@radicalrespectbook.com, and we would love to hear from you.